Welcome to our first unit of study. This is Unit 1, Rigid Transformations and Congruence, Section 1, Transformations. In this lesson, you'll describe how a figure moves and turns to get from one position to another. If you're looking at this after an absence, please, before watching this recording, complete as much of the online Desmos activity as you can. That first activity in Desmos was called Transformers. After you've completed the activity on Desmos, it's going to be a good time to take some notes to see what it was that we were really focused on. We're on page 4 in your notebook. And our learning goal is to describe how a figure moves from one position to another. Describe how a figure moves from one position to another. In our lesson on Desmos, we tried to describe some different kinds of movements that we saw. And there were many different words and phrases that we could use to describe how those shapes moved. So to get an idea of, or a reminder of what you did in the activity, we have 3 students describing how you could move the shape in this first frame to create the shapes in the other frames. And we're asked to choose which frame you think each of these 3 people was talking about. To explain our thinking, we're just going to draw some pictures to help us. So starting with this frame, with this crown-looking thing towards the upper left of the frame, we have Wahali who says the shape flipped over an imaginary line down the middle of the frame. So so I don't mess things up too much over there on the right, I'm going to recreate frame 1 here with this little crown in the upper left. And I'm going to do what Wahali suggests. We use natural language like flipped in our activity today. He's flipping it over an imaginary line down the middle of the frame. So I'm going to draw an imaginary line down the middle of the frame. Let's imagine that we just flipped this over to the other side of the frame. And we'd probably end up with something that looked like this in the upper left, just a reflection on the other side of the frame. So let's look through these other frames to see which one has a crown-looking shape facing up in the upper left, the upper right. And it looks like it's frame number 2. So that's probably what happened with Wahali's transformation. We had this flipped over an imaginary line and it landed over here. Frame 2. Let's do the same with Afia. Again, I'm just going to redraw that first frame to give myself a starting point. And Afia is making this description for our original shape. The shape turned right. So we're rotating this. Turn is just another way to say rotate. And then move down and to the right. So when we turn it to the right, I imagine we're just tipping it to its side. So the crown shape is facing the right. And then we're moving it down and to the right. So let's picture all of those things happening. We've tipped it over, slid it down and to the right. Now that it's tipped over, that crown shape is kind of gobbling to the right. So let's look and see which of the frames up here end up with a tipped over crown in the lower right-hand corner. And it looks like it's this one right here. We're just describing how we're moving from one place to another. Finally, we have Polina. Well, let me draw it one last time. So Polina said the shape took a quarter turn, so it looks like a rotation again, and then slid to the right of the frame. Let me draw that crown again that we started with. Took a quarter turn. They don't say to the left or to the right, but I'm going to assume we mean to the right. And then slid to the right of the frame. So imagine this crown tipping over and then moving to the right of the frame. So kind of like our last one, we just didn't move it to the bottom. It's a terrible crown. Okay. So let's look at where we have a tipped over crown in the upper right corner of the frame. It looks like it is frame number 3. There's our tipped over crown in the upper right-hand corner. So in our activity today, we were just starting to experiment with language that would help us describe the movement from one position to another. At the bottom, let's nail down some of the vocabulary that we talked about in class today. What are some different words and phrases you can use to describe how a shape moves? Well, there's really 3 different moves we were talking about. But as we move forward in this unit, we're not going to call them moves. We're going to develop our vocabulary and call these transformations. In green, I'm just writing more comfortable, natural language. And in pink, I'm going to be just writing the vocabulary that we'll be using for it. I'm going to zoom in just a bit. The 3 moves that we talked about included, if we just, it's an L, slide a figure around, slide it to the left or the right, up or down. We also talked about flips, to flip something over, and turns. That's the natural language that comes out of us. But in this unit, instead of slide, we're going to say translation. Instead of flip, we're going to say reflection. And instead of turn, we're going to say rotation. So that's what we did in this activity today, as we described how a figure moves from one position to another.